It's true, the old saying that practice does make perfect. What's a good way to for silversmiths to practice is by making jump rings all day. You know, when I used to have my big jewelry factory, I used to have like 27 to 38 employees. And every now and then, you know, during the holidays, I'd get like 38. And I would have to train these people. And not everybody is the same. Some people, you know, use their creative side of their brain. Some people use the more, you know, philosophical, you know, mathematical side of their brain. Some people are right-handed, some people are left-handed. There's a million ways of doing the same thing and getting good results. What I used to do is I used to sit and watch my jewelers. I used to have like maybe 4 jewelers and diamond setters. And I used to see how they used to solder their jump rings. And my job, of course, as production manager and owner was to find better ways of doing things. You know, fast-paced. When you're doing 600 pieces of jewelry a day, production style, you know, there's different ways of doing it. And so I used to sit there and watch my jewelers do it, and they used to do it this way. Yeah, so this is how my jewelers do it, right, soldering right from the top. And you can see just exactly what just happened. The solder went right to the left. It didn't even fill in the joint. So this jump ring is basically ruined. I mean, I could grab more solder and try to do it again, but then it would be so thick and then it would be so much cleanup that I'm better off just cutting this one off and starting with a new one. So obviously this method isn't very reliable. So here you can see this is exactly how my jewelers used to do it. They used to solder from the top, and then if the solder wasn't exactly in the right place, it would go down the sides and wouldn't even fill the joint. So there was a lot of rejects. So I used to sit there and say, well, that's like 20% rejects, because a lot of those jump rings they were soldering weren't working, and then they had to cut them off and then do it again. So my job as production manager was to find a better way. So this is the way that I do it. For high quality, production style, very few rejects. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to put the jump ring up in the air with the joint facing down. Now I'm going to try to do this one a little bit sloppy. I'm going to try to use too much solder and place it to the right of the actual joint. And you can see it's still filled. It still went and filled the whole joint. Now you can see it's a little bit thick, but it still filled the joint even though it was a little sloppy and off to the center. Okay, attempt number 2. Let's try to do this one perfect. I'm going to face it upside down. I'm going to use just a little bit of solder and try to get it right dead center from the top and try to suck it down through the joint so I don't have any cleanup whatsoever. This one's absolutely perfect with no cleanup. So basically my trick is to solder upside down, let gravity do the work and pull it down. Even though solder does flow to the hot spots and will flow, I like to put the solder, you know, either from the back and pull it to the front, but certainly from the top, from the upwards place. And just use a little bit of silver so it's not too much, so you don't have to have a lot of cleanup. I could polish this just as is. Okay, so here's my tips on how to solder jump rings high production style, meaning low rejects, high quality joints that don't break and that are easy to clean. What I did with these bracelets right here is I did this first bracelet soldering from the top, which is how my jewelers do it and how you are trained in silversmithing school to do it. I actually had about 3 rejects just doing this one bracelet, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 jump rings. I messed up 3 of them. Which is why I don't do it that way, which is why I solder from the bottom. And every time I get a new silversmith, usually, and you know, I have to train them how to solder, I teach them how to do it my way. And then later on, they can come up with their own way of doing it. But at least they have somewhere to start. This is how I do it. So when it comes to soldering, you have 3 different types of solder. You have soft solder, which is this one here. I mark my soft solder with a circle. So this is soft solder, low temperature. And then you have medium solder, which melts at a medium temperature. I put a triangle on my medium, so that way I can tell the difference. And for hard solder, I put a square, which is for, I really save the hard solder for like maybe ring shanks. Now when I'm soldering jump rings, I usually just use the soft solder, because the jump rings tend to melt pretty quick. And you definitely don't want to use the hard solder because it's a high temperature. You're almost close to the melting point of the silver, and it's really easy to just melt the jump ring right in half, which is what I did on a couple of these right here. So I usually for jump rings I use soft solder because of the temperature difference. Jump rings are really small and it's really easy to just melt them down. So use soft. There's no point of using a medium or a heavy. For the flux, they do have the paste. This is the handy flux, which most people are using, and then you have to mix this down into like a pancake batter mix. Normally you would want to use alcohol, but you can use water just as good. I usually just use water, to be honest with you. And then, but what I technically use is the liquid Mighty Flux Silver and Gold flux in this little bottle here. It's got a little droplet, and then I'll just take the top off usually and just stick my brush in there. That way, this never goes bad. It's good. It's easy to use. I just think it's easier to use. So I use the liquid. I don't mess with the paste. I have a bunch of it, and if you're doing it every day, that would be fine. So then after soldering, I usually will dip it in the pickle and then into the water to rinse the pickle off and then dry it. And then you can, if you use too much, the trick here is to use very little solder. I'll take this and I will just cut just a little bit for jump rings. If you use too much, you'll just coat the whole jump ring. It'll be really, really thick, and then you'll have to basically sand it down and try to do some type of a touch-up. So I just use this a very little bit, just enough so that I don't even really have to sand it or clean it. Now I know when you're soldering joints, you really should, you're supposed to have a nice clean, silver to solder to. It should be nice and you shouldn't have oil or anything on it. When I'm doing like 100 jump rings in production style, I don't clean my jump rings. I mean, let's be realistic. If I'm doing like a ring shank, if it's wide, sometimes. But if you really wanted to, I mean, you could just use a bristle brush like this and just sort of scratch it up. But would I do it by hand? No. Just scratch it up a little bit here and just take, the oxidized coating off the silver a little bit. If you really, really wanted to, you could just use this little bristle brush like that, just to sort of take the coating off and the oil off. But I'm just telling you how I do it. I production style. I don't clean them. I just solder them and I go along and I just get it done. So if you want to be a better silversmith, sit down and solder a whole bunch of jump rings all day long. You'll be a better silversmith by the end of the day. This is how I do it. I hope that helps you. Have a good day. And as a bonus tip to this video, here's how I got close-up shots using my iPhone. Is I took the iPhone and I put this magnifying glass on there. That's usually the lens to my my loupe that I use for setting diamonds, and I put it over the top of the camera. So there's how to get close-up shots using your iPhone without buying any fancy gear. I don't even have a good lens, like a macro lens for my Canon, which is why I was using the iPhone instead of my Canon, my nice camera. It's because I don't have a macro lens.